Talking about it on Britain's newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Well, horrendous events in Israel. We'll try and make some sense of it tonight if we possibly can. Of course, it's the Labour Party conference. Big speech today by Rachel Reeves. And I have to say, in the light of what's happening in Israel, lucky for them that Jeremy Corbyn is not still leader. And the Supreme Court today has been hearing day one of the Rwanda challenge. We'll find out what happened in the courtroom today. Can the government actually win to get this key policy through? But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, with the time at 7 o'clock, our latest news story is that Hamas has threatened to kill hostages if Israel continues attacks without warning. The terrorist organisation says it's going to begin executing Israeli captives in return for any new bombing of civilian houses without a warning. The country has declared war on Hamas after the terrorist group launched an attack at the weekend. More than 800 people are reported to have died so far in Israel, and the number in Gaza is 500 since then. Israel has ordered a complete siege on Gaza, wanting to cut off food supplies, electricity and fuel to the Palestinian territory. This afternoon, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said the siege is deeply distressing.
The humanitarian situation in Gaza was extremely dire before these hostilities. It will only deteriorate exponentially. Medical equipment, food, fuel and other humanitarian supplies are desperately needed, along with access for humanitarian personnel. Relief and entry of essential supplies into Gaza must be facilitated, and the UN will continue efforts to provide aid to respond to these needs.
Meanwhile, here at home, Scotland's First Minister says his wife's parents are trapped in Gaza after visiting family. Humza Yousaf, who unequivocally condemned the Hamas attacks at the weekend, says he's not sure if his parents-in-law will make it through the night. Speaking after a Cobra meeting today, the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly said Hamas's attack, is unprecedented.
We reaffirmed our support to Israel in its self-defense against this terrorist attack perpetrated by Hamas against unarmed civilians in many instances. I've been speaking with foreign ministers from around the region and beyond. The Prime Minister has engaged with the Israeli Prime Minister and will be engaging with our allies. This is an ongoing situation And of course, we will be reviewing our support to Israel and of course British nationals in Israel as the situation progresses.
James cleverly there speaking earlier on. Well, as you've been hearing, the government is defending its plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda in the Supreme Court today. So James Eadie, KC, representing the Home Office, told the court the policy is safe and lawful, despite the East African country being less attractive to migrants than the UK. Meanwhile, a lawyer representing a number of asylum seekers said Rwanda's asylum system is woefully deficient, marked by unfairness and serious safeguarding issues. That comes after the Court of Appeal ruled the policy was unsafe, as there was a risk that Rwanda could send migrants back to their country of origin. Here, more than 400 criminals have been jailed for a total of over 3,700 years after an operation by the Metropolitan Police. Operation Eternal investigated organised crime groups over a 3.5-year period by targeting an encrypted messaging platform. More than 3 tonnes of Class A and Class B drugs and nearly 50 weapons were seized in the largest ever operation of its kind by the Met, with the force calling it unprecedented. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Well, it began on Saturday morning with thousands of rockets being fired into Israel. There were also ground attacks and even paragliders being used to attack a music festival. Something like 10,000 rockets have now been fired into Israel from Gaza. And I have to say, maybe 900, maybe 1,000 people now being killed in Israel. Several hundred, of course, being killed with counterattacks that have taken place, aerial counterattacks in Gaza itself. The numbers of that we don't know, maybe 400 or 500, perhaps it's even more than that. 10 Britons are thought to be amongst those who have been killed. Apart from being slightly shocked with it all, it was the 50th anniversary, of course, of the previous war, the Yom Kippur War that took place. I was stunned at the failure of intelligence. Absolutely stunned that the Americans hadn't picked something up, and that the Israelis themselves, who take intelligence very seriously, did not feel something was coming. The Egyptian intelligence minister has claimed today that he gave them 10 days' notice that something very sinister and very bad was about to happen, but Israel deny this. I have to say, my initial response on Saturday and into Sunday was one of real anger at the BBC. They kept referring to Palestinian militants. That was the word they used, militants, as if somehow they're just political protesters. Well, of course, they're nothing of the kind. They are obscene terrorist mass murderers. One of the factors that I think has led to this is the deal with Iran, struck by President Biden not so long ago, which freed up $6 billion for the Iranians to use. And by the way, we're not exempt from this, because as EU members for many, many years, we were giving money to various Palestinian organizations, often not asking how the money was actually going to be spent. I do believe that weak American leadership has led directly to the war in Ukraine and been at least a contributory factor into what is going on in Israel today. Where do we go from here? It's not simple. As you know, they have taken hostages. Those hostages have gone into Gaza. Gaza is one of the most heavily populated parts of the world. About 2.4 million people living in that small territory. Now, clearly, Israel has to fight back. It has to do its best to try to eliminate Hamas. The problem is that in doing so, we're likely to see not just the execution of hostages, but possibly very large civilian casualties too. We are in a very, very bad place, but be in no doubt, a sovereign, democratic nation, it may not be perfect by any means, but the sovereign, democratic nation of Israel has been viciously attacked, and we have to stand 100% behind them. Now, I talked about that festival that took place in the desert, the Supernova Festival, a festival of joy, people staying for a couple of days, and Nadav Morag is a survivor of that attack and joins me live now down the line from Tel Aviv. Well, you've been through the most horrific experience. I understand 250 people killed and many wounded as well. How quickly did this all occur?
Hello, I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. It was all very quick. What started as a normal rocket attacks that we got used to it, about 40 minutes after the first rocket launch, we started hearing rifle shots and terrorists coming to us from south, from north. And yeah, it was all happening very fast.
And they even used paragliders to attack this concert. I've seen the pictures of paragliders with people on them with guns. I mean, this was just so. This was, from what I can see of it, and you were there. This was just indiscriminate murder.
Yes, there was no. It didn't have to do anything with war. It was just. I would love to share my story. I mean. We were just, partying and celebrating life with beautiful people, and no army near us, and terrorists just, I guess they knew about it or heard about it, and they just came. I wasn't there to see how they slaughtered everyone, but it was just they came to kill civilians. They didn't have any other kill and take hostage. A lot of many Israelis from the party are now in Gaza being held hostage. And yes.
And how do you feel, Nadav? I mean, do you feel that Israel has to fight back as hard as it can?
I think my opinion right now is not what matters, because I was there. I'm affected with my own personal experience. I think Israel has to play smart. Sure, yes, if you ask my opinion, I would love to see Hamas leaves Gaza and no trace of them. I know that there are many good people in Gaza, but Hamas is just terrorizing everything, and they spread hatred, and it has to be stopped.
Well, yes, it has to be stopped, but it's been going on for a very, very long time, and I guess it's not likely that it's going to stop soon. Listen, you've been through an horrendous experience. You've seen some absolutely shocking things, and I want to just say thank you for joining us live down the line from Tel Aviv. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
No, thank you. Well, there you are. There's somebody, he seemed really quite cool and collected given the extraordinary experience that he's gone through. And we have done our best, I think, here on GB News to stop some of the awful, gory details. Now, when you hear the news and you hear about Gaza and you hear about all these different geographical locations, I wonder whether you're like over 90% of the population, that you really don't know and understand the geography and the history of this region. In a minute, I'm going to have an expert with me from Chatham House. We're going to show you the map, show you how the land lies, and explain what the difficulties are going on from here.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, I'm joined by Professor Yossi Mekelberg. He is a fellow of Chatham House and a Middle East expert. And I made the point, Yossi, before the break, we hear about all these places on the news, but people's knowledge is not that great. So take us back to the very start, the formation of Israel.
All right. Good evening, Nigel. What you look here in the map between the Jordan River, you know, the Dead Sea there, Sea of Galilee, and the Mediterranean Sea, all the way to the Gaza Strip, this is what used to be mandatory Palestine. That was the British mandate post-1918. In 1947, the United Nations decided on partition. Resolution 181 for a Jewish state and an Arab state. Between the sides, there was disagreement. Eventually, in May 1948, Israel declared independence. A war ensued. Israel expanded. If, according to the partition plan, Israel should have had a Jewish state, should have 65% of the land and 35 to the Palestinians. Then it changed. And what we see now is, following the war, the West Bank on the right and Gaza constitute only 22% of mandatory Palestine. In 1967, Israel managed, during the Six-Day War, occupy the Sinai Peninsula all the way to Sharm el-Sheikh, the Golan Heights, and the West Bank in Gaza. Golan Heights is still occupied. The Sinai Peninsula was returned in the peace agreement of 1979 with Egypt, and what remains is peace with the Palestinians that hasn't arrived even following the Oslo Agreement, and where a Palestinian state should be formed, the West Bank and Gaza. What we see right now is actually, because also not only they're geographically divided, they're also politically divided. West Bank is ruled and governed by the Fatah movement, the more secular, and the PA is ruling it. And Gaza, after the election in 2006, is actually governed by Hamas.
It's governed by Hamas. They are in control.
Bear in mind, they won the elections. The last election, 17 years ago, they won the election, but the world refused to recognize it. They basically, after a short civil war...
So the attacks have all come from Gaza?
Right now, as we speak, in the last few years, and definitely the last few months, violence in the West Bank is on the increase, whether it's Palestinian militant, but also settler violence, which is getting worse and worse. What we concentrate right now in the last nearly 3 days is what happens with Gaza, because Hamas militants embarked on an operation sea, land, and air, and penetrated into Israel.
OK, I hope, folks, that is helpful, gives you some idea of what we're talking about. Now, we have had some very firm responses today that have come from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and from the Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. Just listen to what they had to say.
Hamas and the people that support Hamas are fully responsible for appalling acts of terrorism. We should call it out for what it is. Citizens of Israel are being murdered. Innocent people have been kidnapped, including children. Obviously, that's shocking and it's horrifying, and they should be held accountable for that. And what I've said to the Israeli Prime Minister is that we will provide all the support that they need to make sure that Israel can defend itself against these kinds of attacks. Now, we already have a very long-standing relationship with Israel. We're one of their strongest allies. We've provided in the past the kinds of equipment that they've used to defend themselves over the past couple of days. And as I said to the Prime Minister, we will continue to provide, whether that's diplomatic, intelligence or security support, as they need.
Labour utterly condemns Hamas's appalling attack on Israel. Labour stands firmly in support of Israel's right to defend itself, rescue hostages and protect its citizens. There will not be a just and lasting peace until Israel is secure, Palestine is a sovereign state, and both Israelis and Palestinians enjoy security, dignity and human rights.
Well, David Lammy being very strong there. In a moment, we will go up to Liverpool and speak to Lloyd Russell-Moyle, Labour MP, about his response to all of this, but I've kept the Professor for a moment. Israel spends a fortune every year on intelligence. Yeah. They pride themselves on intelligence. Whether or not the Egyptian intelligence minister is right with his claim, the Israelis have denied it, something's gone catastrophically wrong here, hasn't it?
I think that's one thing for sure. The intelligence community got it badly wrong. It's always when we hear this kind of warning from Egypt, it takes us back 50 years to 1973, because all the story of an agent or double agent, Ashraf Marwan at the time, providing the information. And that's the problem when there is cognitive closure among the leadership, whether the military establishment or the political establishment. They have their own pre-perception and think, attack won't happen because, for instance, Hamas has no interest anymore in military struggle. We don't see the military capabilities. And more than that is the assumption was that if there would be troubles, bear in mind the last month was mainly Jewish holidays.
Yeah.
So the fear was that the situation would flare up in the West Bank. So units were moved to the West Bank. And while the West Bank was quiet, the disaster struck actually in Gaza.
And it is a disaster. Israel clearly can't just stand there and do nothing. They are going to go, I would have thought they're going to go into Gaza physically, try and root out Hamas. But the problem is, it's very densely populated. There'll be a lot of civilian deaths, won't there?
Again, one of the things we saw on the map, Gaza is a really small place, 360 square kilometers, the home of 2 million people, most of them refugees, including refugee camps. Any idea of entering into Gaza and fighting door to door
would be horrific.
It can be horrific for both sides.
Yes.
And this was exactly what the security force, the IDF, tried to avoid all these years. There was pressure before that, go and eliminate Hamas. But this is the nightmare scenario for everyone. The problem is Hamas pushed Israel to a corner that it has to react. Yes. It has to reassert itself, the deterrence to reassert itself. But I think it should come with a caveat and a big warning here to Israel too. Hamas succeeded, so to speak, militarily, probably more than it envisaged, because there was no defense. As a result of it, it pushed Israel to probably to react more than it ever wanted. They need, even at this terrible time, there are cause for revenge, and maybe the blood is boiling. Always think about the day after the war. Always plan for the peace after that. What situation and how you want to leave Gaza. Most of the, it's not most of, 99.99% and more of Palestinians live in Gaza, and bear in mind they lived under blockade, under siege for many years now, have nothing to do with Hamas, has nothing to do with militancy. Hitting the Hamas is one thing, causing also, responding with atrocities, with more atrocity is not the answer.
But as you say, they've been pushed into a corner.
But
Yossi, thank you for coming in, giving us your expertise. We'll get you back over the course of the next couple of weeks. And we can show you some footage now of a vigil that is going on in Paris. There was a small vigil that took place earlier on in London. By the looks of it, the Paris one is of quite some size. Let's go straight up to the Labour conference in Liverpool and be joined by the Labour Member of Parliament for Brighton Kemp Town, Lloyd Russell Moyle, who joins me live down the line. Lloyd, hello. I'm thinking if Jeremy Corbyn had still been leader of the Labour Party, given that he classed Hamas as being friends, this would have been something of a disaster for your party. But David Lammy, pretty strong in his condemnation.
Well, I don't think there should be any doubt that Hamas have always been a brutal and horrible group of people. Most reports, of course, say if there was actually free and fair elections in the Gaza Strip, Hamas wouldn't get elected, and we've now seen, of course, what they have been doing to their own people. They are now, of course, going over the border and inflicting these awful tragedies and massacres on the Israeli people. So it is no surprise to me, because they are a horrible, brutal regime that don't have the support of the vast majority of Palestinians prior to this moment. So I think it's quite right, the Labour Party's position here, and I'm very pleased that we are pushing to say that things need to be done under international law, and what Hamas did clearly breaches those principles, and there needs to be some sort of reaction. It needs to be moderated. It needs to be, as your last speaker said, you need to think about the peace the day after to ensure that you don't make things worse.
You've been yourself, heavily associated with the Palestinian cause, both in Brighton and in Parliament and elsewhere. Are Hamas the best that the Free Palestine cause have got?
No, I mean, well, first of all, Hamas are not the main government for the West Bank. Of course, that is Qatar.
Sure.
And there is where there have been more democratic elections, there are other left-wing and social democratic parties in Palestine that are active. Of course, they are not active in Gaza. Our sister party leader has been got a fatwa against her by Hamas. Kind of our Palestinian sister party, I mean. So there are plenty of people in Palestinians that really want a democratic and peaceful future, one where sovereignty is ensured and they are treated as a state, which they are under international law, but not, of course, one where they murder other innocent people. That's not acceptable.
No, of course not. Lloyd, to Liverpool, to the big speech today that we got from Rachel Reeves, the shadow Chancellor. Well, she certainly delivered it with quite a lot of vim and vigour. There's no doubt about that. Was there any substance there?
Well, I think there was substance. There was substance around the fact that the Labour is going to clamp down on this waste and on unfairness. And I think that is the principle of Labour, is it not? Where you see money going to the cronies of the Conservative Party, corruption and unfairness, Labour will make sure we claw that back, and not one of them will get away with it. We will track them down in any corner of the earth that they have squirreled their money away. No tax haven will be safe. With our investigators and with our corruption czars, we will make sure everyone pays their fair share. I think that is a really good place to start building our other tax policies around, and that's what she laid out today. Fairness, where no one can escape their duty to contribute to our great country.
Well, I have to say, corruption czars do sound a little bit sinister to me, but hey. And let's remember that we go back a few years.
It was only sinister, Nigel, if you've been involved in corruption.
No. It's just the idea that these people get appointed with enormous powers and they themselves are not accountable to anybody. And Lloyd, you know, it's only a few years ago that Labour were giving out peerages to any party donor that came along. So is this different to New Labour?
Well, one of the great things of the Gordon Brown Commission is, of course, we will get rid of that temptation because we will get rid of this awful House of Lords and replace it with a chamber of the regions and the nations. So, of course, there are things that we learn from our past as well, but we are in the situation of reacting for one of the very worst governments that we've had in an awful long time that has run down this country and has allowed their friends and mates to go laughing all the way to the bank. And the same if you look about how foreign money has come flooding in to Britain to buy up our housing stock and treat our homes as bullion in the streets and in the skies. We will end that as well with an increase in stamp duty for people like that. These are the policies that I think will make people realise that Labour is working for Britain. Labour is prepared to govern.
No, it seems, and I'm not there, but many of my colleagues are, and they say that it's really quite busy and quite buzzy, and there's a huge amount of optimism in the air. Is there not, Lloyd Russell-Moyle, a danger of that 1992 moment where Neil Kinnock thought, it's in the bag, we've got it, we've done, we're going to win this by a country mile? Is there not a danger in this situation of a little bit of hubris beginning to creep in?
There is always that danger, and that's why Keir has repeatedly warned us that we must not assume that this is in the bag, that we must keep pushing at every single direction. And I know that one of the things we're not going to do is assume that any constituency is an easy fight. We are going to be on the ground, in the streets, door to door, making sure that we win that argument.
Well, there we are. Lloyd Russell-Moyle, the Labour version of Winston Churchill in terms of the tactics they're going to operate during the general election campaign. Thank you for joining me live from Liverpool. In a moment, I'll be joined by Liam Halligan. Let's get some economic analysis into what Rachel Reeves had to say, and in particular, the role of the Office for Budget Responsibility. I wonder if she was to do this, what the point would be of electing anybody. All of that in a couple of moments.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're going to stop the boats. We keep hearing that from the government, but of course so much of that, in their minds, is dependent on us being able to start sending people to Rwanda. Well, as you know, there's been endless appeals and all of this, but today it got as far as the Supreme Court. This is the big one, and GB News' Ray Addison was there. In a nutshell, Ray, I mean, as simple as you can, what's really happening at the Supreme Court?
So the Supreme Court hearing, obviously, it's going to be over today until Wednesday. It's all about judgment and trust. It's the government's judgment that it is safe to send migrants to Rwanda, and they're saying that the court should trust that decision because they've got the expertise, they've got the people on the ground, and they've done the due diligence. Of course, the court is hearing from representatives, cases for the migrants, that that judgment is flawed, and that Rwanda is a very unsafe country, and that their asylum system is not fit for purpose.
And the United Nations getting involved as well.
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to be, a Casey representing the United Nations is going to be speaking tomorrow in the court, and they're going to be saying that Rwanda lacks a fair and reliable, efficient asylum system, and they're going to be giving that evidence. And I think that is something that might surprise quite a lot of people to hear that representation will be taking place in
I'm very
British
surprised.
Court.
I'm very surprised that the United Nations is getting involved in a Supreme Court ruling in our country. Now, even if the government were to win, there is still the possibility, is there not, of them being taken to the court in Strasbourg?
Yes, absolutely.
And this is where it gets politically very interesting.
It does, because Rishi Sunak has hinted to journalists, he's indicated to journalists that if they win, they will ignore any other rulings, any other courts, and also any other individual claims by migrants, and they will just start going ahead with that Rwanda policy. Now, I think what gets interesting there is, if they do win, by how much do they win? If it's 3-2 of those 5 judges, or if it's all 5, then I think maybe it's full steam ahead. If it's only a narrow victory, then I think he'll have some question marks there over how legitimate that decision really is and how it would look to the rest of the international community.
Funny though, isn't it? And if you're going to potentially just ignore what the European Court of Human Rights says, I wonder why he didn't even mention it in his conference speech. That's the bit that I'm struggling with. So 3 days of hearings, and then a judgment.
It could take a while. I'm hearing between a month. It could even be, until the end of the year. It's not something that's going to happen quickly. All 5 judges will go away. They'll make their own assessments, and then they'll come together and they'll sit down and figure out what they've come up with, and come up with a unified decision. And that's when we'll hear that result. But nothing immediate.
But politically very, very important. Ray Addison, thank you very much indeed. Keep us in. I can't wait to hear what the UN have to say tomorrow. So please come back and let us know. Why on earth are they interfering? Let's get back up to Liverpool. And we're going to join Liam Halligan, GB News' economics and business editor, and a man who lives his life just on the road at conference after conference, it would seem. Liam, good evening. To begin with Rachel Reeves, pretty confident delivery.
Pretty confident delivery, but this was a speech that was very, very long on crowd-pleasing rhetoric, Nigel, and very short on actual policies, particularly policies which involve spending money. Rachel Reeves, she's no fool. She knows that the government's already spending 110 billion quid a year on debt interest, the second biggest item on the government's balance sheet after the NHS. She knows that UK government borrowing costs are at a 25-year high. Across the world, governments are having to pay a lot to borrow because central banks are probably going to have to keep interest rates higher for longer than we previously expected. That pushes up government debt service costs, and that's why the biggest announcement really from Rachel Reeves today, she said a little bit of something on planning reform, but she says she's going to increase the minimum wage. Well, the good thing about a minimum wage increase, if you're a Labour Chancellor, is that business pays for a minimum wage increase, not the government.
Yeah, well, that's right. It wouldn't be their responsibility. It's the small employer, the medium-sized employer that would finish up picking up the burden. Now, Lloyd Russell-Moyle a moment ago, very bullish. We're going to hunt down tax evaders all over the world. We're going to end non-dom status. And they seem to really believe, Liam, that they can bring in large sums of money by doing this.
Well, what Labour doesn't want to do, it doesn't want to impose tax rises on ordinary households. Taxation's already at a 70-year high, of course, but they do need to raise money because they want to spend money because they're a Labour government, and that's what their voters and their activists expect them to do. So what they're doing is they're going after tax rises which they think will be popular with the broader population. That means going after these non-dom wealthy people living in the UK. The trouble is Labour say that will raise £3.5 billion, but a secret Treasury study says no, a lot of these wealthy people will leave the UK. A lot of them already are leaving the UK, given the prospect of a Labour government. They'll spend less in the UK, and actually this non-dom manoeuvre will cost the Treasury money, says a secret Treasury report. Cost 350 million quid rather than raising £3.5 billion. The same, another bone to throw the left of the Labour Party. We're going to scrap the VAT exemption on private school fees, and that's going to bring in 500-600 million quid. Actually, it probably won't if you talk to independent economists, because a lot of parents will simply stop sending their kids to independent school. The schools will have lower balance sheets, they'll pay less tax overall, and those kids will then have to go onto the state sector, and you'll have to find hundreds, maybe thousands more places, every local authority, for kids of parents leaving the independent sector because they can't afford it when fees are put up effectively by a fifth when that VAT exemption is removed. So there you have it. Labour don't want to spend any money, but Rachel Reeves does want to present herself as a kind of Gordon Brown throwback figure. She literally used the phrase, "I will be the Iron Chancellor," like Gordon Brown. She's saying that she's going to make the Office for Budget Responsibility a lot more powerful. Lots of talk about Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng and the fact they didn't refer their spending plans last October in the mini-budget to the OBR. We had a bit of a panic on financial markets. Whose fault was that? Historians will judge. But Rachel Reeves is very, very keen to be seen to be prudent, more prudent than the Conservatives. Hey, Nigel, taxes are so high at the Lib Dem conference. Even the Lib Dems said we're going to abandon our traditional policy of putting a penny on income tax for public services. So no one wants to be seen raising taxes unless it's on those posh public schools or on the uber rich.
Let's get to the OBR, shall we? Again, one of these words that gets bandied about in the news and in the newspapers, and actually just occasionally it's good to say, right, let's just redefine for everybody what is the OBR, who actually appoints them. It's worth knowing.
So the OBR was set up by George Osborne when he was Chancellor in 2010 in response to Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown, of course, was Chancellor from 1997 for 10 years before he became Prime Minister after Tony Blair. And Gordon Brown picked up a well-deserved reputation, in my view, for fiddling with the figures and changing the growth assumptions and a new golden rule, changing the goalposts, so he wasn't seen to be failing any of his tests. And George Osborne, Tory incoming Chancellor, wanted to put a stop to that. So he said what he will do is set up an independent fiscal watchdog within Whitehall, separate but linked to the Treasury, independent economists appointed by the Chancellor, appointed by committees to basically mark the government's homework, to say to the government, if you make this move on tax, if you make this move on spending, your deficit's going to be this, your deficit's going to be that. The problem is, Nigel, the OBR has become so powerful, their forecasts have become destiny. It's as if elected ministers can't do anything they want to do unless the OBR says it's fine. And of course, no one knows who runs the OBR, who the people are behind it, or where that power actually lies. So there's a democratic accountability issue here.
No, there really is. I mean, you know, if you can't vote for people with different ideas on tax and spend, well, frankly, what's the point of voting for anybody? But she wants to give them more power. All of that said, Liam, how will the financial press tomorrow, in your view, respond to Rachel Reeves' speech?
Well, I've written a piece on the GB News website saying that this speech, aside from the kind of class war rhetoric, which I've mentioned, the crowd-pleasing, tub-thumping, barbs at wealthy people and so on, but this speech, as I wrote in my piece on the GB News website, was basically for the financial markets, to convince the financial markets that Labour are prudent, that they won't spend too much money, that they won't borrow more than they should, that we're not going to have some kind of gilt strike, as we call it, when the financial markets refuse to lend to the British government. Crikey, it happened in 1976. You'll remember that, Nigel. Even I remember it, and I'm younger than you, mate. The International Monetary Fund, under a Labour government, cap in hand, we had to be bailed out. It was our economic Suez moment, when the fact that Britain was no longer a world-class economy really came to the fore. It was, for me, that and the winter of discontent which ushered in Thatcherism. That happened under a Labour government. Gordon Brown spent a lot of time talking about being the Iron Chancellor, being prudent, and in order to counter that, and now Rachel Reeves is doing the same. Look, absolutely. In credit to her, she delivered the speech really well. I thought it was balanced between what delegates here want and the outside world wants. But be in no doubt, Nigel, as the weeks and months go by, the fact that this shadow chancellor will not be wanting to be spending money, won't want to be pledging to borrow more money, won't want to be pledging to tax more, the left of the party, they will become increasingly impatient with that, increasingly fractious, and the two sides of the Labour Party, the kind of hard left ideologues and the centrists who want power, the kind of, new wave of Blairites, people like Rachel Reeves, they are going to come to blows. They are going to come to loggerheads. Is Keir Starmer Tony Blair enough? Crikey, Tony Blair is an adjective. Is Keir Starmer Tony Blair enough to keep that coalition together? Or are the left going to freak out and frighten the horses of Middle England and blow this election?
Liam Halligan, great analysis, great stuff. Thank you very much indeed. And tomorrow, of course, we will get Sir Keir Starmer's speech as leader. After the break, I'm going to tell you a story. You may not know it, but it's a story about our history. Yes, our history and slavery, and one that we should be enormously proud of, and I think should be taught to every single school kid in this country. Stay with me. Let's have some good news about this country and its past.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo,
there'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Eminent people like the Archbishop of Canterbury tell us regularly we should hang our heads in shame because of our role in slavery. In fact, you'd think, to listen to some people, we'd be the only country in the history of mankind ever to have engaged in the activity. But there is another really very, very big story that I bet many of you don't know. Well, Colin Kemp is chairman of the West Africa Squadron Memorial Fund, and Colin is going to tell us about what happened in this country after we decided to abolish slavery. Colin, good evening.
I'm afraid I can't hear you.
You can't hear me. That's very bad news. That's very bad news indeed. Right, we will try and sort out the technicals on this. So basically, after a very, very long campaign led by Wilberforce and others, in the end, we do decide to abolish slavery in this country. But of course, slavery, the slave trade, is still taking place on an absolutely huge scale. And we then decide that actually we are going to do something about it. And so we set up the West Africa Squadron, Royal Naval Squadron. And over the next decades, what we do is we use the Royal Navy to stamp out slavery. We stop the other nations conducting slavery and shipping slaves to the Americas, to the West Indies. Colin Kemp, I've got you back. Colin, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
I was just explaining the basics of what the West Africa Squadron was. Just tell us, how many years did we pursue this, our attempt to drive out slavery, and at what cost?
OK, the West Africa Squadron was formed in 1808, a year after we, as the first country to abolish slavery, and we operated until 1867.
Wow.
During that time, we freed 150,000 slaves and lost 20,000 of our own men. Now, the cost is interesting because at the height of its operation, the West Africa Squadron took half of the whole Royal Navy budget, or 2% of Britain's GDP. An enormous expenditure.
It is just the most astonishing story. And obviously we felt morally it was the right thing to do. And yet, Colin, it appears to have been lost, perhaps deliberately lost, by those who don't wish us to think well about our own country. But you're attempting, as I understand it, to get a proper memorial to the 20,000 men.
Yes. I think I've lost you again.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Well, this is absolutely hopeless and very disappointing because Colin is doing a fantastic job. Now, what he's going to do, he needs to raise £70,000 for a statue that'll get put up in London in honour of those slaves. And what I'll do, folks, is I'll make sure that in a pretty prominent place on the GB News website, you can see where, if you want to give a little bit of money towards what Colin Kemp, the retired businessman from Chichester, is trying to do. And the real question I ask myself is, why are we not teaching this to every single kid in school? All nations have engaged. And if you're looking at it now, you can see it's www.crowdfunder.co.uk/West Africa Squadron. That's there now, but I'll make sure that it's prominent on the website. Jacob Rees-Mogg joins me. Jacob, all nations at times have engaged in slavery. We seem to be attempting to tell our youth that we are uniquely evil in all of this, and yet that story that Colin wants to tell is an amazing one.
We're not uniquely evil, we're uniquely good, because we are the first country that decides, as a matter of moral imperative, we have to stop slavery. And if you look at the 19th century, look at things Palmerston's doing in the 1820s, the 1830s. He's making our relations with both the United States and with Portugal more difficult because they're continuing to be involved in slavery, and we're saying it's wrong. We use up political capital, diplomatic capital, throughout the 19th century opposing slavery. Why is Gordon, for example, moving to the 1880s in Khartoum? He's in Khartoum to try and stamp out the slave trade. Every other country in the world had accepted slavery as normal until the British Empire decides it's abnormal, immoral, unchristian, and roots it out.
Why are we not telling people this? Because I'll bet you that story that Colin is now trying to push, and he wants to get a statue, memorial, very good idea.
I didn't know that story.
Didn't
and
you?
I think I'm quite well informed
Good
on...
Lord. The mob didn't know. The mob didn't know.
So I was absolutely
all
fascinated.
That wasted money and eaten, the mob didn't know. Did you really not know that story?
No, I didn't know that story. I didn't realise that we'd lost 20,000 lives and that we had had a squadron. I knew that the Royal Navy had tried to stop the slave trade.
Yes,
absolutely knew that. But I didn't know the...
And astonishing to think it was 50% of the Royal Navy budget at one point.
2% GDP. And that is currently our whole defence budget.
Yeah, well, that's right. Another thought, Jacob, if I may. We've seen in Manchester, we've seen in Brighton, we've seen in London, people out celebrating the attacks, the Hamas attacks on Israel, the loss of life. I'm hearing this evening that a London Jewish school is telling school kids to cover up the school badge. Whilst what is happening in Israel and Gaza is truly horrendous, we're not in a great place here on this, are we?
Well, it's a very small number, but these people are wicked. I mean, to support the brutal killing of entirely innocent civilians. Yeah. And the stories are heartrending. There's a story about the parents of twins who hid their twins and were found dead by the Israeli military. And the cruelty of this is the sort of barbarity that one hoped had ended, and anybody protesting in favour of Hamas is putting their hands in blood.
But it's happening, I'm afraid, and it's happening on our streets. Very quickly, Jacob, what's your main story tonight?
We're obviously going to be talking about what's happened in Israel and the horror of it, and the need for the West to do two things: to support Israel, but also to do everything it can to stop Iran, because it's Iran that is behind this.
Absolutely, and that's why I think what Joe Biden has done with Iran, constantly appeasing Iran, is the most gigantic error. It is a huge mistake. That's it from me today. Be back with you tomorrow at 7.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We'll see some patchy low cloud and fog developing, particularly across southern parts of England and Wales, but further heavy rain pushing into Scotland. That's courtesy of weather fronts pushing through over the next few days. This weather front, a dividing line between warm air to the south and colder air trying to come into the north by the middle of the week. We've already got that cloud and rain spilling into parts of Northern Ireland, pushing into western Scotland as we move through this evening into the early hours. Elsewhere, turning quite grey. There'll be some mist and low cloud developing by the end of the night, particularly across southwestern parts of the UK. And fairly mild temperatures for all staying up in double figures. So it's a wet start across Scotland to start Tuesday morning. Outbreaks of heavy rain, which will continue to push slowly southeastwards through the day here, so we could see some further flooding issues. Brightening up across parts of England and Wales, some low cloud though lingering across southern counties. Plenty of hazy sunshine here, lifting temperatures to around 23 or 24. Turning increasingly windy across the northern half of the UK as weather fronts push in. Those weather fronts slowly push their way southwards into Wednesday, turning heavy at times, particularly across parts of Wales. Further north, brighter, sunny spells and scattered showers, particularly across northwest Scotland. Some of these heavy at times, quite muggy across southern parts of the UK under that cloud and rain. A bit fresher further north and turning cooler as we head towards the weekend.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30am.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello.